it's a full state of new schemes. So I'll try and go through it as simply as I can over the next 10 to 15 minutes, and sure you can ask questions afterwards. Our starting point, just to explain, you'll see the word CSP around a lot, and CSP means CAP strategic plan. So we're used to seeing the word CAP. So CSP is this CAP strategic plan. There's 9 different objectives around the policy. I'm not going to go through them, but I suppose it's setting out a policy to achieve something for farmers, the citizens of the EU, and climate. So I'll just leave it at that. If you want to read the document, it's on the Department of Agriculture website. There's 528 pages in it. So where are we now at the moment, and where are we going to? So I'm going to start with where we are at the moment. So if we look at the 2022 direct payment and that pot of money, how is it divided up? That Terry has gone through the application form as to how you apply for it. So currently, 70% of the payment that you get in October and December is made up from the basic payment entitlement. 30% of it is greening. Now, I suppose when you look at your payment, you'll see a 44% top up. So if you add 44% to 70, you get to 100. Convergence started to take place in 2015, and by 2019, the minimum value that all entitlements had reached was 110 euros. So that's this 60% figure, okay? We've heard about a cap on entitlements. There's currently a cap there. It's limited to 150,000. So nobody is getting a payment of basic payment entitlements above that figure at the minute. And they can get their greening on top of it, which brings you up to, I think, 175 or a figure like that. So there's very few farmers impacted by this cap. There's also the straw incorporation measure that Terry mentioned, and a protein payment. So these are all part of the Pillar 1 pot. If you're not sure what your entitlements are currently for 2022, they're similar to 2021. The statements are to issue in the near future. So you will get a text message stating that entitlement statements are up on your ag food account. So if you get that and you're wondering what it is, well, that's what the text message is about. So you can log in and check, okay? So there's a little bit of new terminology that we'll have to get used to in the new cap. So the first one is BIS. So BISS is the Basic Income Support Scheme. So that replaces the Basic Payment Scheme. So we'll have BISS entitlements to replace the Basic Payment Scheme entitlements. We'll also have a CRISS. So that stands for Complementary Redistributive Income Support Scheme. Okay, so that's front loading. So we're talking about an extra payment on the first 30 hectares. Then we've got an eco scheme. So eco scheme partially replaces greening. Some of the greening measures that we have are going into conditionality, and more of them are appearing in the eco scheme. And John is going to talk about those in a little bit. And then Terry mentioned a national reserve. There'll be one of those again. And there'll also be a young farmer scheme. But the young farmer scheme has a new definition, and it's called Complementary Income Support for Young Farmers. Okay, so I'll come back to those over the next 10 minutes. Sorry. Okay, so if we look at CRISS, so it's a front-loading payment. Sorry, no. Oh yeah, sorry, skip the slide. So for Pillar 1 in the future, from 2023 to 2027, the pot is divided up a little bit differently. So we have 3% will be taken and will be used to fund young farmers through the new young farmer scheme. We'll have 10% going to front loading this CRISS scheme. 25% of it will go to the eco schemes that John will talk about. And then the remainder kind of is sitting in a pot with BIS. The cap that I mentioned that's currently there at 150,000 on basic payment entitlements will drop to 60,000, okay? And in this category, there's only 200 affected. So the chances are of one even being on this call would be fairly slim. BIS will continue to converge. So we're at 60% in basic payment. We'll get to 85% under the new cap reform. And we'll reach this 85% by 2026, even though the cap reform will last till 2027. So the last 2 years of it, we may have a similar payment. Some of this BIS money, 3% of it, of this pot will end up in the National Reserve to fund new entrants to farmers that don't have entitlements. And then we have a continuation of the straw incorporation measure and the protein payments. And I think there might be a little bit more money diverted to those two schemes so that more land can be put into those crops. Okay. So then if we look at the CRISS, or the front loading, so what's happening here is it's a mandatory in this current round in this cap. It was voluntary and wasn't applied for in the 2015 to 2019 round, or this current round. So what's happening is they're taking 10% off every entitlement and they're giving it back on the first 30 hectares. So if you're farming 60 hectares, you'll only get this payment on the first 30. And it's estimated that it'll be somewhere around the 44 euros. So if you have 30 by 44, it gives you 1,320 euros. So the payment will be around that, give or take a few euros. These figures are subject to rounding. And you do not need entitlements to get this payment. It's based on eligible hectares that you have on your application form. So if you have 20 hectares on your farm, but you only have 10 entitlements, you'll get the CRISS payment on all 20. Okay. If we look at the eco scheme, just a little bit of background on it, John will go into more detail. I mentioned 25% of this pot essentially replaces greening. The payment will be somewhere between 63 and 77 euros. It's expected that in the first 2 years of it, not everybody might apply for it. And if they don't, the hectares that are applied for on the eco scheme, they'll divide the hectares into the pot of money. So the payment may be as high as 77 euros. But over time, it'll go down to 63. The Irish government has in the agreement that unspent money is retained in the country for the first 2 years. So there's a learning phase to it. Okay. This payment is also based on an eligible hectare. So it's not based on entitlements. So you could have, back to your 20 hectare farm with 10 entitlements, you could claim your eco payment on all your 20 hectares, even though you only have entitlements for 10. John will mention that there's 10 options in the proposal and you can choose 2. Okay, these have been widely mentioned and published in the press, so you're probably well aware of these measures. Then if we look at convergence, well, we currently have a net unit value on your entitlement statement, and what will happen is those sets of entitlements will continue to converge towards an average figure. The minimum point, as I mentioned already, is 85% of the average. Where people are capped or higher or have higher values, they will fund this convergence for the people that are converging upwards. Okay, so there's a cost to converging upwards, and capping, and the higher people with the higher values will fund that. As regards what your entitlements will look like, the Department of Agriculture are currently developing a calculator. It's nearly ready to go, so hopefully it will appear on their website in the near future. And they'll probably do, press releases, and if you keep an eye on the press, you'll probably see about it. So all you have to do is log on to their website, put in your figures, and you'll see how it will affect you. So just to note, people are wondering about reference years, and that there's no reference years in this proposal. So the existing sets of entitlements that you have will just continue to converge towards the average. And there'll be no entitlements expiring, like everybody's entitlements expired on the 31st of December 2014, and they generated a new set of entitlements on the 1st of January 2015. That's not happening this time. So just to look at some payments that people have, I'm just picking 3 categories because they're probably easier to do. The figures are fairly sound. So we've got the minimum that I mentioned already. So with convergence, the minimum payment is 110 euros per hectare. If you add 44% to that, you get 48 euros. So that's your greening payment. So the total minimum payment that people are getting got in 21 and will get in 22 is 158 euros per hectare. The average figure that's there at the moment, if you got entitlements from the National Reserve a couple of years ago, you'll see that they're now worth 179 euros or 178 euros 99, figure like that. Add on your greening of 79 euros, you're getting a payment of 258. And under the last round, nobody could be paid more than 700 euros when you looked at the basic payment and greening together. and due to different cuts and things that have happened over the last couple of years, that max payment is now €472 per entitlement. When you add on the greening onto it, this 44% top up, those people are now receiving €680 per entitlement. So they're the current minimum, average, and maximum figures that we have. So I'm now going to look at what happens to those as we move forward. So as I mentioned already, we have no reference years. The number of entitlements you have stay the same. The values will change. The average payments will be similar, as we'll see in a second, and transfers of entitlements are still possible. So if we look now to the future payments, so this is what's in the draft CSP that the Department of Agriculture lodged to Europe. So we've got this BIS payment that I mentioned. So the minimum payment will be, it's expected to be around €145. So that's this 85% that we're achieving. The CRISS is a fixed figure of around €44. We'll get our eco scheme payment, I mentioned, between 63 and 77. So let's stick with the lower figure. So you're now achieving €252. So that's the minimum payment that people on this level will achieve by 2026. Okay, so we're converging upwards. So this figure is getting bigger over time. These two are staying the same. So by 2026, the people with the lower valued entitlements will achieve 252. The average figures will stay similar. So the BIS average will be 165. CRISS is adding 44 on the first 30 hectares. We have €63 of an eco scheme on all our hectares, bringing a total to 272. And if we look at the people with the maximum payment of 472 in the eco scheme, this will now drop to about 285, the Department of Agriculture reckon. Now, it's not nailed down. It's in the proposal that when the calculations are done, they figure it to be 285. You get your CRISS and you get your eco scheme. So the max payment anyone can achieve per hectare would be 365. Okay. So now I'm going to just put these together to make it easier for you to do a comparison. So if we look at 22 versus 2026 payments, so we look at the minimum figures. So currently we're on the top side of the table. So BPS greening gives you a total of 158. And in the new system, we'll have BIS, CRISS, and ECO adding to 252. So from 22 to 26, there'll be a nice increase for those people that have a minimum payment. So they're going up the guts of €100 per hectare. If we look at the average figure, currently 179 plus 79 gives you 258, and that will change to 165, 44, and 63. So you go from 258 to 272. So maybe a slight rise, but overall very little change. If we look at the average farm size in Ireland of 34 hectares, you won't get the CRISS on all 34, you'll just get it on the 30. So that's the story with the average farmer. So they'll stay more or less the same. And if we look at the maximum payments, currently those people are getting 680, they'll drop to 365. So if you're a fairly ambitious farmer and you have been farming fairly intensively for the last 20 years, the chances are your entitlements are at worst average and at best somewhere above average. So if you're somewhere in this category, your payment may take some little bit of a cut. Okay, and how to do that, we'll have to wait for the Department of Agriculture calculator to see how that'll look. Okay, so I'm now just going to put up a slide on the active farmer. There's a proposal there where the active farmer is now going to be defined as those engaged in at least a minimum level of activity, a stocking rate of 0.15 livestock units per hectare. So the equivalent of a lowland ewe per hectare is what's in the proposal. So we just have to see how that works out. The department will know all those people that keep cattle through censuses and that they're active, and those people that are in, selling silage or growing cereals may need to supply documentation like receipts or payments for goods and services to show that they're showing a level of activity. So that's all in the proposal, and we'll just have to wait and see how that's going to be managed in the future. If we look at leasing entitlements and clawback, there's a proposal there to make changes to the way we trade entitlements at the moment. there's an awful lot of paperwork and administration around leasing entitlements. Lots of people lease out or lease in small portions of entitlements. And last year, I think the Department of Agriculture would have processed over 30,000 transfers of entitlements. So there's a good bit of administration burden there. And I suppose the farm organisations have been looking for to get entitlements into the hands of the more active farmers. So the department have put a proposal to Europe, and I'm just going to go through that fairly quickly. You may have read about it in the press. So they're talking about lifting the 20% clawback on the sale of entitlements without land for the years 23 and 24. So some people have been leasing out their entitlements year by year, didn't want to sell them because there's a clawback there. Now they may have an opportunity to sell them without clawback. So that's an incentive. They're also talking about implementing a new clawback percentage of 10% on entitlements per annum, where somebody is leasing out more than 80% of their entitlements for less than 5 years from 2023. So those farmers that are people that are maybe not farming are leasing out most of their entitlements on a year-by-year basis, or where there's a lease less than 5 years. So what they'll do is, if you're leasing out 10 entitlements, you lease out 10, the National Reserve gets 1, and 9 entitlements go to the other party. So it'll work like that. And if you do a long-term lease instead, you'll avoid that clawback. Okay. There will be allowances made for force majeure and inheritance cases in line with the normal rules. And the plan is to review this and sit down with all the farm organisations in 2024 to see, is it achieving anything? If it is, it might be tweaked, and if it's not, it may be dropped. So there'll be a review of that. Another thing that we get lots of questions on is around leasing land and entitlements together. And maybe there's lots of land leases that have expired at the end of the year, or due to expire in the next while, and you're wondering what you should do. And I suppose there's two sides to it, and we often are on both sides. We might be advising a lessor today and advising a leasee tomorrow. So from the lessor point of view, the person that owns the land and the entitlements and is not farming, is leasing them out, if they take a wait and see approach, which they could do, they may risk losing retirement relief if they decide to transfer on their land and entitlements to the next generation while they're alive. So if you're in that situation and you're wondering what to do, it's worth having a chat with both your advisor and your accountant, because you don't want to end up with some unintended consequence of losing out a relief that maybe you might want to do. In terms of people that are renting in land and entitlements, it would be wise maybe if your business plan or what you're doing with the land is contributing to your profits, maybe to renew the lease. The entitlements and the land will continue on as we've known for the last number of years until 2028, but we don't know what happens after that. For those people that have been leasing out for the last 10 or 15 years, and maybe they have a next generation coming along, when the lease is up, they can complete a succession plan if they want, and they'll be able to pass over the land and the entitlements to the next generation. With a lot of the tax reliefs, there are active farmer conditions. And if the young person wants to go farming, well, then they need to watch the active farmer definition. So they'll have to show some activity, animals in a herd number or whatever. And I'm hearing lots of very high rents are available. So if I had land, I'd be inclined to nearly rent it out with what rent I'm hearing is available. To those of you that are on the call that are farming on rented land, you'd really have to look at the price that's been paid. Can you afford to pay it? Are you generating a profit from it? Maybe you're lucky if you have land on a long-term lease and the rent is reasonable. But if you're in a renewal situation, you really do need to be careful and have a chat with your advisor. For those lessors, and you're trying to do a deal at the moment, and you're trying to maybe rent land for 7 to 10 years, we actually don't know what's going to happen in 2028. We're in 22 now, and we only have a proposal for 2023. So what's going to happen post 2028? Well, if entitlements are at 85% of the average by 2026, and negotiations start a year or two before the end of this new cap, I think they might be heading towards a national average figure. So if there's full flattening that happens in 2028, well, maybe we don't need entitlements at all. And maybe it's back to what happened in the early McSharry reforms, where if you have 10 acres of wheat, you'll get 10 payments. So it might be just back to whatever land is on your farm, you'll get a payment on that land. So just be careful if you're doing long leases. There might be no entitlements after 2028. So thanks for your attention. I'm not going to say any more. I'm sure there's lots of food for thought there. So back to you, Richie.
Perfect. That's great, James. That's a great insight to what's going to happen in 2023. Keep the questions coming. As I said, there's a Q&A box at the end of your screen, so keep the questions coming in. Just one question there I'm going to put you is just on the max. You have the max entitlements, and there's a figure thrown around there of 60,000 max. It was 150. Just explain that 60,000, James.
Okay, so the max payment is based on the BISS element of the new payments. So when we get our new statement of entitlements in 2023, all of those entitlements added up together, if they come to more than 60,000, there will be the cap will be applied. So every euro that you're due to get that's over this 60,000 limit, 85% of it will be taken from you. So it's not the entitlements are taken from you, they'll still sit there. You'll just be paid 60,000. And if your payment was, say, supposed to have been, we'll take a simple figure, let's say it's supposed to be 70,000. Well, you take 85% of the 10,000 that's above the 60, and you get 1,500 instead. So you'll end up with 6,000, 60,000, 61,500.
So you take off the current system, you take away the greening, and that's you use that.
Yeah, so greening is separate.
Separate.
Okay. So in round figures, if somebody is currently getting a basic payment plus greening payment of 100,000, when all the calculation is done, the cap doesn't really affect them. But if their current payment is over 100,000, where you add basic payment and greening together, the cap will come into effect. There'll be a small cut in those people.
Okay, and there's a question, I know it's outside, so the money, the pot of money you started there tonight, the pot of money is Pillar 1 money, but there's a question coming in about the new reps and gloss scheme opening, which I know is Pillar 2, which you mentioned. So when will those new schemes start from Pillar 2, which is reps or gloss or REAP?
Yeah, from my discussions with the department, it's most of my discussions with them are on Pillar 1. And as the basic payment scheme or the new BIS scheme in 2023, it's like a foundation scheme. Every other scheme hangs off it. So I think in order for a new gloss scheme for the department in order to run it, you're putting in maps and you're claiming on LPIS numbers. So those numbers have to be cleared on the basic payment. So I think maybe that scheme mightn't open until the autumn of 2023, because it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. If you do the gloss plan in early 23, but the basic payment application isn't completed, how do they check what land is there to work out your payment? So I think the department, Portlaoise and Johnson Cast are kind of in negotiations to try and figure that out at the minute. So I don't think the department could even give a definitive answer on that.
Okay, but it's
complicated. Yeah,
it's a different pot of money from what we were talking about tonight. Terry, is there any other questions?
Just a little bit in the land leasing there, Richie there, just I suppose clients there wondering if your lease is up now on land and are thinking of renewing that lease, are there any repercussions going forward, given that entitlements as we know it are changing come next year, and what sort of stream of income could they expect to receive for leasing out their entitlements going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question, Terry. Sometimes people ask me, the leasee wants to pay back the lessor the money, and is the greening included? And I'd ask, well, what's in the agreement? So if you're renewing a lease now and there's land and entitlements in it, well, we've got the BPS entitlement and we've got the BIS entitlement that you're going to have in the future. The CRISS and the eco schemes are separate payment. They're not hanging off a percentage of the new entitlements we'd have. So I would think the easiest way to do all this if you're negotiating a lease is, if the person is insistent that the entitlements have to go back, well, it's the BIS element of it that you pay back, and you work out some wording that goes into the lease that both people are happy about, and let the rent then balance up. So the other thing is, can you afford the rent? So, and if that's too high, you just walk away from it. So,
and just maybe Richie, maybe we'll address, Michael had that question on the 15 acres with no entitlements and applying to the National Reserve for the entitlement allocation, and he's 62 years old. So I think you would up the conditions on a previous presentation too, is there. I have them there, and if you want to answer it, James, you're more qualified to answer it. So it's National Reserve more than the Young Farmer Scheme.
I'll have a go at it. So if you're 62 years of age, if you're only recently started farming, you may qualify under the new entrant category in the National Reserve. If you've been farming all your life, well then, there's no category in the National Reserve for you. So the only way to get entitlements is to either buy them or go out and rent them.
Okay, and will we be paid on scrub land in 2023?
Okay, that's an interesting one. The department are telling us that, the space for nature option that John might go through, there's talk that there'll be an extra 55,000 hectares coming back in. So some of us, when we look at our maps, we'll see these red-lined areas of scrub. So those areas of scrub may come back in under an eco scheme. I don't think, and I'm not sure, whether that land will be available for entitlements. So we could be looking at a couple of different definitions of land. So you might have one definition for eco scheme and another definition for BIS. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one.
In fact, I know you've answered this. The CRISS is paid on 30 hectares per applicant or on every set of entitlements owned or leased.
Yeah, up to that limit of 30. So if you have 10 hectares, if you have 30 hectares on your farm, and you have 10 entitlements owned and 20 entitlements leased, you'll get CRISS on all your 30. Or even if you have no entitlements, you'll get CRISS on your 30 hectares. So that's not based on entitlements.
Can a farmer safely lease out 100% of his entitlements in 2022 without fear of losing them?
Yeah, they can. The only thing that they need to watch is that the person that they're leasing them to draws them all down, so that they're all used. So because there's a 2-year usage rule around entitlements, so the person that's taking them from you, that they have the land to draw them all down. So that's the only. It's a little. I suppose the lessor needs to be aware that they're used on the other side. But yeah, there's no problem there.